So I am so excited to be kicking off the 2024 CLT Summit here in my hometown of Vancouver. You know, what's really interesting is that in the next 3 days, we're going to be centering our conversations around the theme of stewardship. And having worked in co-op housing for the last 17 years, I really sort of focused on the physical assets. So when I thought of stewardship, I thought of taking care of the buildings. You know, we're in the business of building affordable housing, not disposable housing. I thought of the land, and then I really set back, because what was unique about the Community Land Trust is that stewardship really speaks to the trust in Community Land Trust, and it really extends to what's on this slide here is protecting assets in one's care. And if we pause for a moment, we realize that these assets may be physical and they may be non-physical, so sort of intangible, because it's the intangible that's really brought us here today. So protecting your culture, protecting your heritage, protecting a model of housing that you know, if it's scaled up, has long-lasting impact for so many people. Protecting prior injustices and amplifying and spotlighting these injustices to society today. So I ask you to reimagine stewardship in both that context of tangible and intangible. When I was a lot younger, I have to say, our Saturday mornings were spent in our old Cadillac heading down to Hastings Street. We parked in the parkade, almost always couldn't remember which level we parked our car, but we walked through Woodward's onto Hastings Street because we were headed for Army and Navy, Canada's largest discount department store. For those of you that don't know A&N, it closed in 2019, but it had a lasting effect in the city of Vancouver, at least for 100 years. And then we proceeded to shop at the small businesses in that area, save on meats, fuels, grocery shops, and so forth. And at Christmas, there were Christmas tree displays in the Woodward's building, and that was part of our Christmas routine as well. And I bring that up because that area doesn't look anything like that today. Woodward's has been converted to condos, private ownership, valued at, I don't know, 800,000 or more, maybe $1 million. I don't have the exact figures, but it's private ownership. The small businesses have closed, and now it's the site of homeless encampments for people that have fallen on hard times. And I say that because it really daylights the fact that our system is failing so many people. And the work that we are doing as community land trusts, in whatever our community land trust looks like, really underscores our work and somehow is going to slow down the momentum of what's happening today. So I have the pleasure, as you heard from these two groups, I really was torn today because there's Hogan's Alley Society and then there's the Community Land Trust Foundation of BC. I play a role quite different in both, but very exciting, and it's really given me a front seat. I've worked for co-op housing for the last 17 years, and I've had a front seat to the growth and development of that sector. So I'll start by talking a little bit about each of these organizations. As different as they are united in the fact that they're using a community land trust model. But there's some themes that are consistent, some common threads. And as you listen to those threads, I hope that you can identify your own journey on your community land trust as well. So I have to check with my notes, get caught up. So co-op housing has been around since the 60s. So these are homes that are affordable. And when we say affordable, people say, what does affordable mean? Well, it means that people that live there are paying less than market rent, and their housing income is not going, their rent or housing charges, as we call it, is not going to exceed about 30 to 35% on average, depending on each building. What's unique about co-op housing is that as your family composition changes, you can stay in co-op housing. So you may start as a single, expand your family, maybe go on parental leave, go back to school, retire. All of these options are available to you if you live in co-op housing, and you're not displaced from your community. Some people change their unit size and go on waiting lists, and you're not leaving your neighborhood. So it's really been a proven formula for a mixed income family. You elect a board of directors through a democratic process, and I think there's a lot of people in the room that know what co-op housing is about. So in order for co-op housing to work, it needs financial support. Typically, ideally, 3 levels of government. From the federal government, that might look like a mortgage. From the provincial government, possibly an operating agreement for the building maintenance. And from the municipal government, that might look like a lease with the city of Vancouver, for example. And when those 3 levels of government, taking different turns, stopped investing in new co-op development, what we saw was the fact that there was long waiting lists. At the same time, we were experiencing an affordable housing crisis. And it really created a glut of people that just wanted to get in co-op housing. And as I've explained, if you're going through these stages in your life, these units aren't turning over all the time. So I once spoke to somebody that said, I got into my co-op, I waited 7 years to get into my co-op. And our goal at CHF BC is that there's a co-op home for anybody that wants that kind of co-op, that kind of living. So that's what we aspire to. Today, we are 271 housing co-ops, 15,000 homes. And where we got those numbers is because 2012 is when it all changed. It's kind of that force that changed. And what you're seeing on the slide there is the Athletes Village Housing Co-op. If you're new to Vancouver, it's part of Vancouver that's called Olympic Village, not too far from Science World and by the seawall. And this co-op, so 2010, the Winter Olympics in Vancouver, these are where the athletes stayed when they were there. And we got 84 units and created our first co-op in a very, very long time. So that really sparked the interest from the city and from other community agencies, a renewed interest in co-op housing. And thanks to the work of our CEO, Tom Armstrong, anybody that could make a decision, inform a decision about community housing, he was going to tell them about the Community Land Trust. He was just relentless. And in 2014, we signed a deal where it was our first new co-op build in more than a decade. To the right, I guess you can see Tom there. I think everyone knows Tom, but he's in the blue jacket. And to the right is Mayor Gregor Robertson. He was the mayor at that time. And he, in his report, the Mayor's Task Force for Housing Affordability says that the City of Vancouver was going to support existing and new community land trusts, and they were going to look at a new refinancing model. So we had a grant from the Shared Success Program from Van City Community Foundation. And in 2015, we were able to hire our inaugural executive director, Tiffany DeZita, who's in the middle. And believe it or not, we're celebrating our 10 years, Tiffany, as a community land trust, a foundation of BC, next year, and Tiffany's 10-year anniversary as well. Incredible leadership from, to take a membership association and create what we call now CLT Development Services Society, which is a social purpose real estate developer. And we have, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get the number wrong. I think it's close to 40 staff as well. Tiffany's shaking, so I got it right. Thanks. That's a good thing about having cheerleaders in the front row. So I'll pause there because that's where we have new housing co-ops. But remember that group of housing that was built earlier. For some of them, they were facing housing insecurity. And what that might look like is they got into some financial problems, and you'll hear about some of them in my colleague Mania's presentation coming up. And others were on leases that were expiring. And the leaseholder was not their priority was not to maintain the affordability the people living in the housing co-ops. It was to get the best return on their investment. So using a community land trust model, and please don't ask me about the numbers, I just know it's crazily complicated. There was a contribution from this person and this city, but here is a first example of the historic deal for Burnaby, and these were 2 Burnaby co-ops that would have been sold to the private market. And remember, at that time, there's an insurgence of real estate investment trusts that are looking to purchase these older buildings. We call them, there's renovictions and all kinds of things are happening. So to be able to save these homes at this time with a community land trust was a game changer, because you can't just keep building new housing if you're gonna lose the existing housing that you have. For these individuals living here, it not only meant that they could maintain their housing, but it meant that they can maintain their housing as a co-op. They weren't just gonna be in the average rental market. They had lived next to each other for the last 30+ years. This is not the only deal that we've done in the Community Land Trust where we're bringing in existing housing stock into the land trust. In fact, Manya will talk about Coquitlam, but we can't ignore the impact. It's almost 1,000 homes that are saved that were already housing co-ops that might have been lost. So 2016, a year after Tiffany started, this is what the trajectory looked like in terms of our housing. And by the end of 2024, we estimate that 1 in 8 of the housing co-ops in British Columbia will be a community land trust co-op. Okay. So what did we do that was different? Well, we changed the way that we delivered co-op housing. The first group of co-ops that were built, each co-op was an individual home. So the average housing co-op in British Columbia is about 56 units. So it was incorporated as a co-op with its own board, which we still do today, but there was no vehicle of growth. It was a very aggregate stock. And with the Community Land Trust, we are taking a portfolio approach. Every housing co-op still has a resident board, but we're operating it as a portfolio of homes. And that is really, if you want to say, the sweet sauce in terms of the fact that we are taking control of our own growth in the sector using the Community Land Trust model. This model is getting the confidence of funders, and it really is quite a positive story for the last 10 years. So now let's take a look at the fact that when we created our Community Land Trust, CHF BC was already 30 years old. We're established, we had reserves, we had a proven model that we knew what we needed to do. And it's a stark contrast to the Hogan's Alley Society. So I'm just gonna position where Strathcona is, directionally challenged, but it borders downtown East Side and Chinatown. And if you walk by there today, it's a fairly affluent neighborhood, and you're probably not asking yourself, what's missing, but you should, because there was an entire Black community that lived there, almost 800 families that were displaced. It was also a hub for a lot of migrant families because it was affordable housing in that area, and there were racialized policies within the city of Vancouver. So if you were a person of color, you couldn't live in certain parts of Vancouver. So it was a very vibrant community. So why were they displaced? I went on the US tour with the team this year, and it's a recurring theme in terms of, in our case in Vancouver, it was the viaduct. And other places, it's some sort of highway where the community was displaced, and almost always there was an alternative route, but they chose to run the viaduct through that area. 5 minutes? Okay. Okay. I have 5 minutes. I'm going to talk really quickly. Great. So Hogan's Alley Society is, today it is operating of a 52-unit modular housing. Sorry, this 5 minutes really threw me off. And it's our mission today is as leaders of culturally informed affordable housing. We operate Nora Hendricks Place, And we are focused as a convener for the Black community. And I really want to point out the research that's done, because we can't receive support for our Black community if there's not data to support that number. So Hogan's Alley has a housing solutions lab that I'm sure the team will be happy to share with you. This is the turning moment for Hogan's Alley Society. This is the Memorandum of Understanding. The City of Vancouver acknowledges the history and commits a block. And I want to pause and give thanks to the leadership of the board of Hogan's Alley and a number of community leaders at that time. That included Dr. June Francis, Stephanie Allen, Amina Yassin, where's Petros Kuzmu. It was a 25-person unit group. So sorry if I missed anybody, but Randy Clark and all that was there. It was quite pivotal. This is what the block is going to look like. And it's going to be the hub of the Black community in Vancouver. It's going to deliver on housing, public benefits. There's going to be a Black cultural center, which I just learned from Jacka last week was being advocated for since the 70s. So it's a really big deal. And this grassroots association really was a board of community activists, and Jacka only celebrated 2 years here, and she's done so much in the last 2 years. So I wanna credit the team of that. So 2 different land trusts. If I'm going too fast, I'm sorry, because I really want to get to the fact that there were these themes that I've pulled out that are quite significant. So see if your land trust lines up with these. They disrupted, and I use the word disrupt carefully, disrupted the status quo. For co-op housing, it was an entirely different model of how co-op housing was delivered. For Hogan's Alley Society, they had to daylight the injustices. And as I think about when I first heard about Hogan's Alley, I was laughing because I was like, who are these people blocking the viaduct? I can't get home. And then they literally blocked the viaduct. So disruption for sure of the status quo to show and daylight the systemic racism. Caring for community. For Hogan's Alley Society, I didn't get to talk about the work of Uda Kam and Siobhan Barker in terms of the community care that they're doing, but they're really providing culturally appropriate supportive housing. And for many of us, you do need to talk to Siobhan and Uda Kam, but what does that even look like? Well, imagine you're a person at risk of homelessness, and their community kitchen includes food that you would normally eat when you were a child, or it really brings that sense of home. This is the stuff that goes through Siobhan's head, and she makes it happen for this group. So it's so important to highlight that community care is part of the work that's being done. And for the Community Land Trust, the co-op has a lease with the Community Land Trust, so we set aside in the lease as a requirement for homes for people that of developmental disabilities. And this group of people may live semi-independently, but a co-op community is perfect for them. And they wouldn't be able to access co-op housing through the traditional methods. The same thing with the YWCA and the BC Society of Transition Houses, where getting access to a 2 or 3 bedroom home is a game changer. If you live in Vancouver, it's very expensive. But if they don't get a 2 or 3 bedroom home, they're not able to keep their family intact. And by embedding these units that must be held as long as the lease is in place with the Community Land Trust, this is really how we're focusing on that community care. Community consultations, I've seen it when I went to Weymouth Falls and went to Upper Hammonds. I see this happening very much at our Community Land Trust, and it's certainly in place at Hogan's Alley Society with stakeholder listening, community consultations, and development. Like, what is that block gonna look like? It's very interesting conversations around the board about what an Afrocentric design looks like, let me tell you. But if you show up here in a couple years, you'll see what we came up with. Oh, I missed, how do I go back? So the community consultations for co-op housing, the board of the Community Land Trust includes 12 directors that are from co-ops just generally. And as we develop a particular project, we create what's called an operating board, and that's comprised of the ED, the CEO, and myself, the COO, and we steward it until the co-op is built. And when the co-op is built and occupied, you have to wait till they're occupied so they can actually elect their own residents, and then they create their own board of directors. So that's 3 voices that's being brought to the table. And finally, partnerships. Sorry, trying to go back. Partnerships is key. When you visit our community land trust co-ops, you'll see that there is Tikva Housing, which is housing for the Jewish community, and Fraser View Housing Co-op on the same site. You'll also see Makola Housing, where there's Indigenous housing and a co-op on the same site. And these are just a few of the partnerships. For Hogan's Alley Society with Entre Nous Femmes, they've set aside 40 units for us to operate, and in the new building that they're building in Northeast Falls Creek. And at Tira, they played a critical role in turning over Nora Hendricks Place. We hadn't really sort of stepped into the space as a society before, and we needed to build capacity. So for 1 year, Hogan's Alley staff worked alongside Tira staff, and this last June, thanks to the work of Udakam and her team, they were able to transfer the full ownership, a full operation of Nora Hendricks Place into Hogan's Alley. But we couldn't have done it without partnerships. So, we considered stewardship not only the physical asset, but it's using the physical asset to leverage this bigger, intangible work that we're doing, the work that's brought us all here. It could be cultural, it could be what is our mission and vision, that's really that is, and it has to be stewarded as well. We looked at a mature versus a grassroots, but they're both using the community land trust, and we pulled out 4 common themes of partnerships, community consultation, community care, and disruption. Let's never forget disruption. I think it gets us all started. Maybe there's some more themes that we'll talk about over the course of the next 3 days. But the final stewardship I want to end on is self-care. This work is not for the faint of heart. And as we all know, we are excited. We are like, doors are opening up never before, but we can't do this work if it's on an empty tank. So you saw some of the restrooms. I think being on a summit is self-care, setting aside a time for a little bit for learning and input instead of the output every day. So I do encourage you to do that. I'll be around for the next couple days, and I'm willing and happy to introduce myself to those of you that I haven't met. Clearly from the room, there's a few of you that I already know, and I'm just going to end it right now. Thank you.